I have two questions. First question sounds easy, but it's not. So the first question is, what is the most authentic Jewish food? Can you guess? Okay. If you say bagel and lax, you're wrong. For there are Jewish communities around the world that have never even heard of bagels and lax. If you say chicken, you're wrong. Because there are many good and pious Jews who are vegetarians who never eat chicken. If you say kugel or kigel or gefilte fish or Umentaschen or strudel, you are wrong. You see? For there are Jewish communities around the world that do not eat these delicacies and have never even heard of them. So you give up? Challah, pastrami, okay. So the only authentic Jewish foods are matzah and maror. Schon gehört? Matzah and maror. Unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Why do I say that? Because these are the only two foods that we are commanded to eat in the Torah. Anything and everything else that we eat is a matter of taste. These are the only two foods that we are required to eat. Good? Neither is a great delicacy, is it? Matzah is hardly a delight, and maror tastes even worse. Yet these are the only two foods that it's a mitzvah to eat. Isn't that strange? I don't know, but perhaps it is to teach us that fancy food are not essential to human life. That food that teaches values is. Matzah teaches freedom. Maror teaches that there can be no freedom without suffering. And these are lessons that we need to learn. And to make sure that we learn them, the tradition makes us to eat them so that we will not forget. Therefore, anyone who eats matzah and only comments on how crummy it is, anyone who eats maror and only talks about how bitter it is, misses the point. These are the only two foods that we are commanded to eat. All the others are the caviar and the duck and the stuff, chicken, all this fancy food. We may love them, but they are not required. They are nice to have it if we can afford them. They are not required. They are not a mitzvah to eat. The other two are. The second question is, what is the only building that is authentically Jewish in its style of architecture? Christians have cathedrals and basilicas that express the theology. Chinese have pagodas that capture the spirit of the culture. Mosques are to be found to the Middle East and wherever Muslims live, because the mosque is an expression of the belief structure of Islam. But where do you go to find authentic Jewish architecture? In fact, is there such a thing as authentic Jewish architecture? The answer is that there isn't. If you go to the Museum of the Diaspora in Tel Aviv, and you study the synagogue and you study the synagogue models that are on display, you will see different. That are built in the Moorish style from Spain, are built in the Christian style from Germany, and synagogues that are built in bold, innovative, experimental styles, like in America, like this one. And when you see how many different sizes and shapes shuls come in, you will realize that there is no one official, universally accepted, halachically required synagogue architecture. So what then is an authentic Jewish architecture? There's only one building, if building it can be called, which is authentic Jewish architecture. And it's called the Sukkah. Muy bien. The Sukkah is the only building which we are required to construct. Isn't that strange? The only foods that we are legally required to eat are plain, unappetizing, Matzah and maror. And the only building that we are required to build is a plain lean-to, a hut, a shed. No sukkah has ever won a prize for most innovative building, because the law is very precise how it must be built. Number one, has to be in such a way that you can see through the roof, that you can see the stars. So obviously cannot have a very thick roof. And the sukkah has to be built in such a way that its walls are not very sturdy. It's a building, if it can be called that links you with the outside more than separates you from the outside. It's a building that's called us back to the time when we live in the wilderness. It's a building that reminds us of the precariousness of all buildings, even the ones that are made of cement and concrete. We go out of the so-called permanent buildings and move into temporary shelters once a year, so that we may realize that even the permanent buildings are also temporary buildings. If you don't believe that, look at the Twin Towers that once seemed so imposing and so permanent, and that now lie in rubble. Let me call your attention to two more examples of Jewish architecture. First, what kind of building do Jews get married in? Chuppah, which is the plainest, simplest, most rudimentary kind of a shelter that there can be. It's even more fragile and even more temporary than a sukkah. There are no walls to the chuppah, just 4 thin poles, and there is no roof to the chuppah, just a cloth cover. What does it mean? A bride and a groom begin their marriage by declaring that their new home will be open on all sides. It will be open to those in need, will be a part of the community. On the one hand, there is no more private and personal relationship than marriage is. On the other hand, the bride and groom declare that they are part of the community. There's one more place that Jews revere, a place that is even more open than the sukkah and even more open than the chuppah. Can you guess what it is? You did so great today. The kotel, the courtyard in front of the kotel of the Western Wall. The most revered place in all of Judaism is the one to which Jews come in awe and reverence from all over the world. But then, you get there, it's not really a building, it's a wall, which is the remnant of a building that once stood there. Open plaza, totally open plaza, where people come to stand, to pray, to meet, and to be. The sukkah, the chuppah, and the kotel are all places that celebrate openness, no containment. The first premise of every building is to contain what's inside. The first premise of this building is to open to what lies outside. Sukkah, chuppah, kotel are authentic Jewish architectural structures. And what is that they all have in common? Their openness to what is outside of them. They exist not to protect us from elements, but to connect us to elements. Let me be fair. There were Jewish buildings once whose architecture was clearly defined, whose measurements were officially set. There was the Mishkan that the Israelites built in the wilderness. There was the Beit HaMikdash that the Israelites built in Jerusalem. Those buildings no longer exist, and we don't have intention of rebuilding them. For us, as Dr. Heschel observed, the Shabbat is a palace in time, a portable palace that we can take from wherever we go. And let me be fair, I'm not suggesting, God forbid, that our synagogue today need to be as frail as a sukkah or as open as a plaza. Of course not. We are entitled to and expected to build beautiful buildings in which to worship. Such a concept of idur mitzvah, which means if you do a mitzvah, you should do it aesthetically. You should make it beautiful, no? We are so proud of what we accomplished together, and this room can have 400, and second section 600, and 900, and 1800, and we benefit from that. But synagogue should be as beautiful as possible, but at the same time, if they have budget to build a building, they need to have budget for tzedakah and for study. If not, they become golden calves. So, in this Shabbat, when you remember that the 2 foods that are Jewish are the matzah and the maror, And the most Jewish building is the one who has a very fragile roof. As we enter the Sukkah in just in a couple of minutes, let's remember all those who live in Sukkah permanently, that the best food they can accomplish is matzah and maror. And let's understand that if we have Zman Simchatenu for us, if we have this holiday of happiness, let's remember those who are less fortunate than us. And let us say, Amen, Amen. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. Please rise for Aleinu.